This video is best enjoyed during lunch, dinner, before bed, or when you need something in the background while studying or working. Now let's get started. In front of the main entrance of a seaside hotel, where guests come and go, where brief stories pass by like waves offshore, there is an image that never changes. Max, a German shepherd with thick brown and black fur, now graying in many places from the sun and sea winds. His ears stand straight up, always alert, but his head slightly bowed, as if he has grown accustomed to the weariness of time. His eyes are as deep as the ocean, carrying a sadness no one fully understands, but also reflecting a glimmer of determination, the light of waiting. For 4 years, Max has sat in exactly the same spot, always gazing toward the main road leading to town. He doesn't wag his tail when called, doesn't run over when someone extends their arms, and refuses to move far from the hotel. Whether under the scorching summer sun, during the fierce rainstorms of the rainy season, or in the biting cold winds when winter arrives, Max is always there. He is not an abandoned dog. He is waiting for someone. In summer, the sun beats down on the hot cement, making the air in front of the hotel stifling and oppressive. Guests emerging from the lobby have to squint against the blinding light, but Max sits motionless in the sun. His thick coat is soaked with road dust, the fur on his back no longer soft as it once was, but now dry and rough. The sunlight casts down, making Max's black fur shine with a burnt golden hue. On particularly hot days, hotel staff bring Max a bowl of cool water, placing it right by his feet. Max licks a small sip but never finishes it, as if he fears that if he takes his eyes off the road, even for a moment, the person he's waiting for might return and not find him. During the rainy season, damp winds blow through, violently striking the trees in front of the lobby. The sky darkens, black clouds roll in, covering the sky. Heavy rain pounds on the hotel's awning, water splashing noisily on the ground. Max curls up under the awning, his long tail wrapped around his body like a protective layer. But no matter how heavy the rain, as soon as it stops, he returns to his usual spot, gently shaking his soaked fur, and continues to look out at the road. In winter, the cold air sweeps in from the ocean, creeping into every corner of the town. Max's thick coat is no longer enough to keep him warm as before. Each early morning, people see Max trembling slightly, but he still sits there, unmoving. He doesn't know if the person he's waiting for will ever return. He only knows that if he leaves, that person will never find him again. 4 years is a long time, and throughout that period, many people tried to help Max, hoping he could abandon his seemingly hopeless wait and find a new home. Mrs. Martha, the owner of the small cafe across from the hotel, was one of the first to care for Max. Every day she prepared a bowl of food, placed it in front of the hotel entrance, and gently called to him. Max never rushed to the food when it appeared. Unlike other stray dogs, he would just quietly approach, lower his head to sniff the bowl, then eat slowly, his eyes never leaving the road ahead. Mrs. Martha, though accustomed to this silence, never stopped talking to him. Each time she set down the food bowl, she would sit beside him, stroke Max's slightly rough fur and whisper, "Who are you waiting for, little one? I hope someday that person will return." She understood that despite all her kindness, she could not change what Max was waiting for. Not only Mrs. Martha, but even hotel guests were drawn to Max's strange loyalty. Some people, moved by his situation, tried to take him home, hoping to give him a new life. One family, while vacationing at the hotel, became particularly fond of Max. The 2 small children often ran to play with him each morning, stroking his soft fur and laughing whenever he wagged his tail slightly. The mother, seeing how gentle and well-behaved Max was, gently knelt down, caressed his pensive face and whispered, "Would you like to come home with us? You'll have a big garden, two little friends who will always love you. You won't have to wait anymore." But Max just stood still, showing no reaction, no excitement or fear. Only his eyes remained steadfastly looking into the distance. When the family left the hotel, they tried to lead Max to their car, even having prepared a beautiful collar for him. But as soon as they left the gate, Max immediately stopped, pulled strongly away from the collar, turned and ran quickly back to his spot. He sat down in that exact position, breathing heavily, his eyes never changing direction. The children looked after him with sad faces, but the mother could only shake her head and sigh. "He doesn't want to go. He's waiting for someone." The hotel staff, those who had worked there long enough, also had memories of Max. An elderly woman who worked as a housekeeper recalled what she had witnessed. 4 years ago, Max wasn't a stray dog. He came here with a group of tourists. Back then, he was happy and full of life. He always followed one person, always wagging his tail when he heard that familiar voice. But then, that group left, and Max stayed behind. Another receptionist also remembered something. "I remember thinking they would come back for him, but day after day, Max was still here." No one knew exactly what happened that day. Only one thing was certain. From that moment on, Max never left the hotel, never stepped beyond the boundaries of the wait he had set for himself. Stories about Max gradually became part of the hotel, a story everyone knew but no one could change. People had tried to take him away, but he always came back. They had tried to give him a new home, but he didn't want to find a replacement. New guests would arrive, curiously asking about the dog, always sitting in front of the lobby, and the staff could only shrug, saying, "He's waiting for someone." But who was he waiting for? And would that person ever return? No one knew the answer, except Max. Late that afternoon, a sea breeze carrying salt swept through the roadside trees, causing the sea to ripple with small waves reflecting the fiery red sunset. The seaside hotel glittered in the evening light, an ideal place for tourists seeking peace after busy days. But one person came here not for a simple, relaxing vacation. Ethan Carter, a famous YouTuber with millions of followers, had just stepped out of his car with a heavy mood. For many years, he had lived amid the non-stop whirl of work, shooting vlogs, editing videos, planning new projects. His trips were always tightly scheduled. His smiles on screen always had to be perfect. But after a long time pursuing fame, Ethan began to feel empty and exhausted. This time, he didn't come to film videos about beautiful scenery or famous places. He just wanted to find a bit of quiet, a place where no one knew who he was, where he could quietly blend into nature without having to pose for the camera. He chose this hotel because it was far from the center, a place that seemed perfect for him to escape from his usual noise. But as soon as he stepped down from the hotel steps, his eyes were immediately drawn to a strange sight. Beside the main gate, where the sun had turned the distant road red, a large dog sat silently, its eyes looking into the distance with a heartbreaking patience. Ethan stopped, his eyes fixed on the dog. This was no ordinary dog. Ethan stood still, observing. The dog didn't wag its tail when he approached, didn't come closer as other dogs usually do with strangers. It wasn't showing wariness either, but carried a deep sadness in its eyes, as if it had seen too much, had waited too long to have any emotions left. He bent down, gently extending his hand in front of it, like a silent greeting, but Max didn't react. He just slightly moved his ears, but his eyes remained unchanged, still looking toward the road ahead. A strange feeling crept into Ethan's heart. He had filmed many stories about abandoned animals, stray dogs who were found and returned to their homes. But Max wasn't like any dog he had seen before. There was something truly special about him. Ethan stood up, walked into the hotel lobby, but as soon as he reached the reception desk, he turned back to look through the glass door. Max was still sitting there, motionless like a living statue. During dinner at the hotel, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Max. When the waiter brought out the food, he tried asking, "The dog outside? Does it have an owner?" The waiter looked at him, then smiled slightly, as if this was a question everyone who came here had asked. "You're new here, aren't you? That's Max. He's been here for 4 years." Ethan frowned. 4 years? You mean he's been sitting there for 4 years? Yes, every day. He's not a stray, but he doesn't have an owner either. He just sits there and waits. Waiting for whom? Nobody knows. But if you ask the people who've worked here long enough, they'll tell you. That answer made Ethan even more curious. A dog that had been waiting for 4 years, through sun and rain, and no one knew why? He couldn't ignore the story. The next morning, Ethan decided to find out more about Max. He crossed the street to the small cafe where he'd heard that Mrs. Martha had been caring for Max for many years. As soon as he walked in, Mrs. Martha was standing behind the coffee counter. She looked up at him, and before he could say anything, she spoke. "You want to ask about Max, don't you?" Ethan laughed. It seemed like everyone who came to this town was drawn to Max's story. "Yes, I couldn't help but notice him." Mrs. Martha placed a cup of coffee on the table, pulled up a chair, and sat across from him. "You're not the first person to ask about Max, but I guess you're the first one who wants to film this story." Ethan suddenly startled. She knew who he was. "I didn't think I was that famous." Mrs. Martha laughed softly. "I've seen your videos before, but you know, sometimes stories don't need to be told in the spotlight. Sometimes they just need someone who truly cares." Ethan felt his heart soften. He knew she was right. He took out a small camera, placed it on the table, not filming directly, but just turning on the audio recording. "So, can I hear the story about Max?" Mrs. Martha nodded, her eyes reflecting a hint of compassion. 4 years ago, Max came here with a group of tourists. He once had an owner, but then one day that person left and never came back. "So he's been waiting since then?" "That's right. No one knows what happened to his owner, but I know one thing for certain. Max has never given up hope." Ethan clenched his hand. A story like this couldn't be ignored. That evening, he opened his laptop, starting to search for any clues that might help him uncover the truth about Max. When he typed in the keywords "German Shepherd lost 4 years ago," he didn't know he was getting closer to a mystery that had never been solved. Max wasn't a stray dog. He was waiting for something or someone, and Ethan had decided to find out the truth.
4 years ago.
4 years ago, Max's life wasn't as lonely as it is now. Back then, he was a dog full of life, happy and loyal, always by the side of the most important person in his life, Ryan. Ryan Parker was a young man full of passion, always eager to explore and fond of long journeys. He never went anywhere without Max by his side. To Ryan, Max wasn't just a dog, but a companion, a family, everything. They had been together for many years, jogging together every morning, traveling together down unfamiliar roads. Max understood each of Ryan's habits, recognized each of his emotions just through a glance or a sigh. And Ryan was the same. He always knew when Max was happy, when he was sad, when he needed a hug. That summer, Ryan and his friends decided to take a trip to the beach, a long-awaited vacation. It wasn't just an ordinary trip, but an adventure that he promised would never be forgotten. And Max, as always, was an essential part of this journey. Their dark blue SUV rolled along winding roads leading to the seaside hotel. Each sea breeze carrying salt blew through the window, making Max excited as he stuck his head out, breathing in the free air. Ryan laughed loudly, gently patting his head. "Do you like it, buddy?" Max didn't answer, but his constantly wagging tail gave the clearest response. They arrived at the hotel when the sun was nearly setting behind the horizon, its light painting the sky golden. Everything was perfect at that moment. Ryan and his friends quickly checked in, planning for the days ahead: swimming, diving, night barbecues, and a trip along the cliffs to enjoy the magnificent scenery. And Max, as an indispensable member, always followed Ryan everywhere. He remembered very clearly the path from the hotel room to the main lobby. He remembered every stone on the beach where he and Ryan had played. He remembered the nights lying on the sand, listening to the waves while Ryan whispered about his dreams. But Max didn't know that this vacation would be the beginning of a pain he would have to endure for the next 4 years. On the third day of the trip, Ryan's group decided to drive along the Cliff Road, a beautiful but dangerous coastal route. The steep cliffs, sharp turns, and slippery road surface due to sea mist made this place always a challenge for careless drivers. Ryan sat in the driver's seat, Max comfortably lying in the back seat, his head resting on Ryan's shoulder as usual. The group of friends laughed, played loud music, enjoying the memorable moments of youth. But in one fateful moment, everything changed. A truck from the opposite direction suddenly lost control, sliding on the slippery road. In an instant, the bright headlights shone directly into Ryan's eyes. There was no time to react. The SUV skidded to the side, the tires lost traction. Ryan tried to control it, but it was useless. The car went over the edge of the road, out of control, and plunged down the cliff. Max felt the terrible impact, the car flipping multiple times, the sound of screeching metal, glass shattering. The panicked screams of Ryan's friends echoed in the shocking space. And then everything became silent. Max didn't remember exactly what happened right after. When he woke up, everything around was just a wreck. The car was overturned, glass shattered on the ground, blood stains spread across the leather seats. But Ryan was no longer there. Around him were ambulance sirens, hurried footsteps, figures passing by like unreal shadows. Max barked frantically, trying to find Ryan, but was held back by someone, pulled away from the scene. He struggled, clawed at the ground, tried to rush toward the overturned car, but the strong hands of a rescue worker held him tight. "This dog is panicking! Hold him back!" But Max wasn't panicking. He was looking for Ryan. He had seen him right here, just an arm's reach away. But now he had disappeared among the ambulances, strangers in white coats, doors slamming shut and wheels rolling away. Max was left behind. No one could explain to Max what had happened. No one told him that Ryan had been taken to the hospital in critical condition. No one told him that Ryan's friends were also seriously injured and were taken far away from this place. No one told him that the hotel had no reason to keep him anymore. When everyone left, Max still stood in front of the hotel lobby, his eyes never leaving the road where the ambulances had disappeared. He didn't understand why Ryan didn't come back. He didn't know that his best friend had gone through a series of surgeries, had endured months of pain in the hospital, and finally had been swept into a new life and never returned here. Max only knew one thing: Ryan had left from that road, and therefore he would return from that road. And so he waited for the day Ryan would emerge from that gate, calling his name like in the old days. Waited for the day he would pat his head and smile brightly. "You did great, buddy. I'm back." Waited for a day when the past 4 years would just be a cruel dream, and when he woke up, everything would be the same again. But 4 years had passed and Ryan had never returned. The sea wind blew strongly, carrying salty spray across the gray sky of that afternoon. The ambulance sirens had faded into the distance, leaving only tire marks on the damp road. The seaside hotel still stood there, its yellow lights inside gradually turning on. But to Max, the world around had become empty. He ran everywhere. Max didn't understand what was happening. A minute before, Ryan was still with him, still sitting behind the wheel, laughing with his friends. But in the blink of an eye, the crashes, the broken glass, the terrifying screams had taken him away. He ran along the beach, his paws stepping on the fresh tire tracks. He rushed down the coastal road where Ryan's car had rolled down the cliff. But all that remained were debris and oil stains on the road. The waves crashed against the cliffs, washing away what was left of that day. Strangers stood around, looking at him with pitying eyes. Someone tried to kneel down, extend a hand in front of his face, whisper words of comfort that Max couldn't understand. He avoided them, backed away, his eyes frantically searching through the crowd. But Ryan wasn't there. Max continued running, his legs exhausted from running for hours, but he couldn't stop. He ran to every corner of the hotel, to the parking lot, to the cafe where Ryan used to buy drinks every morning. There was no trace of his master anywhere. Finally, he returned to the only place he knew for sure Ryan had been, the seaside hotel, where they had arrived together, where they had spent happy days. Max didn't leave anymore. In the first days after the accident, the hotel staff still hoped that Max would leave. They thought he was just lost, just looking for his owner, and when he didn't see Ryan return, he would gradually give up. But they were wrong. Every day, Max still sat in the same spot in front of the hotel gate, his eyes never leaving the coastal road. He watched every car passing by, his eyes lighting up with hope each time someone stepped out of a car similar to Ryan's. But then, one by one, people passed by without anyone stopping to call his name. Regardless of storms or scorching sun, Max never left. On sunny days, his black and brown fur began to fade under the blazing sun. The temperature rose, the hot ground sometimes making Max's steps tremble. But he still sat there, as if afraid that if he left even for a second, Ryan would return and not find him. On stormy nights, the wind howled through the roadside trees. Rain lashed against the cement ground, blurring everything in the cold water. Max curled up under the hotel awning, his eyes still not leaving the road ahead. He wasn't afraid of rain, nor of wind. He was only afraid of waiting in vain. Gradually, Max was no longer the lively dog he once was. He grew visibly thinner, his once thick coat now dusty and tattered. But the scariest thing was that he no longer reacted to the world around him. New hotel guests were curious when they saw a large dog always sitting in front of the lobby. They tried calling him, tried petting him, tried bringing food to offer, but Max just remained silent, not wagging his tail, not excited, not barking. It seemed like all that remained in him was the wait. Mrs. Martha, the owner of the cafe across from the hotel, was the only one who truly cared about Max. She had witnessed his wait from the very first days. Every morning she placed a bowl of food in front of the hotel gate, but Max never rushed to it. He only ate a little at a time, his eyes still always looking toward the distant road. The hotel staff also tried to help many times. They tried to bring him inside, but Max just stood at the door, refusing to step across the hotel threshold. They tried to take him away, but as soon as they left the gate, Max would pull hard on the leash, break free from the collar, and run back to his spot. Gradually, they accepted that nothing could shake his determination. Time passed, the old hotel staff took turns leaving their jobs. Tourists came and went, only Max remained. 4 years, too long for a dog to live in the fragile hope that its owner would return. But Max had never given up. Each morning as the sun rose, Max would go to his familiar spot, sit down and look at the road ahead. Each afternoon, when new guests stepped out of their cars, he would look up for a brief moment, then lower his head in disappointment. Each night, he curled up in a small corner outside the hotel lobby, not leaving, not seeking a better shelter. Max didn't know that Ryan was no longer here. He only knew that Ryan had left from that road, and he would certainly return from that road. He would wait, even if it meant waiting forever. 4 years passed, and no one thought Max would ever meet the person he was waiting for again. But miracles aren't always easy to spot. One day as the sun began to set, a stranger arrived at the hotel. Someone who knew nothing about Max, but somehow he was about to change his life forever. Ethan sat on the hotel bed, the pale blue light from the laptop screen reflecting on his thoughtful face. The sound of waves crashing outside seemed to be overshadowed by the tangled thoughts in his head. For many days he had observed Max, had recorded those haunting moments when the dog silently waited for someone who would never return. But Ethan knew that every story had an answer, and he was determined to find it. He opened the browser typing, "Car accident at Coastal Cliff, 4 years ago." A series of news headlines appeared. Ethan quickly scrolled through the articles, his eyes suddenly stopping when he saw an old photo. The SUV flipped over at the edge of the cliff, glass shattered, wheels hanging precariously as if just a strong wind could push it into the sea. Serious accident on coastal road, group of tourists lucky to survive. Ethan opened the article, his eyes quickly scanning through the information. The car carrying 5 young tourists lost control and plunged down the cliff. All were rushed to emergency immediately. Among them, the most severely injured was Ryan Parker, 22 years old, who suffered serious injuries and had to undergo multiple surgeries to sustain his life. Ryan had survived. Ethan held his breath. He hadn't died in the accident. Ethan continued to search deeper, trying to trace Ryan, but there were no articles mentioning his life after the accident. It seemed Ryan had completely disappeared from social media, from his old life. He decided to do the only thing he could do, share Max's story. Ethan turned on his camera, adjusting the angle so that the sunset over the sea created a warm backdrop, then pressed record. "This is Max." The camera panned to Max, the dog still sitting in front of the hotel lobby, his eyes never leaving the main road, like a silent signal of loyalty. For 4 years, this dog has never left. He still sits in the same spot, day after day, looking toward the road where he last saw his owner. People have tried to help him, tried to take him away, but Max refuses because he's not lost. He's waiting for someone. The camera zoomed in on Max's eyes, eyes containing the deep sadness of an endless wait. But the most heartbreaking thing, the person he's waiting for also thinks he's gone. Ethan paused, taking a deep breath. His voice became slightly hoarse because he too could feel the loss that Max had endured for the past 4 years. Ryan Parker, if you're still out there, if somehow you see this video, you need to know that Max never left. He's still here, waiting for you. Ethan ended the video, edited the most important footage, added images of Max since he arrived at the hotel, then uploaded it to his personal YouTube channel. The title of the video, "The Most Faithful Dog in the World, 4 years waiting for someone who never returned." Ethan couldn't have imagined that in just one night, his video would spread at a dizzying speed. "This made me cry. Someone find Max's owner." One of the most touching stories I've ever seen. Does anyone know who Ryan Parker is? We need to help Max reunite with his owner. On Twitter, hundreds of thousands of shares appeared, along with the hashtag #, find Max's owner. On Facebook, posts while searching for Ryan began to appear continuously. Major newspapers quickly joined in, even digging up the old accident to find more information. And then a message changed everything. I'm an old friend of Ryan's. We lost touch long ago, but I know he's currently living in another city after the accident. I can help contact him. Ethan read the message, his heart beating faster. Finally, after 4 years of hopeless waiting, perhaps Max's story was about to take a major turn. While Ethan waited for contact from Ryan, he continued to search for more information. What he discovered left him speechless. After the accident, Ryan had undergone more than 8 major surgeries. His face was no longer the same. The scars, the facial bone reconstructions, and months of recovery had made him look completely different from before. Ryan no longer recognized himself in the mirror. Not only had his appearance changed, but his life had been completely disrupted. He had left his old city, never returned to places that once belonged to him, never contacted old friends. And most importantly, he believed Max was lost or gone. Throughout the years of recovery, Ryan had never returned to the hotel. In his mind, Max had probably been left behind after the accident, had found a new home, or had not survived. He didn't know that a dog was still sitting waiting for him for 4 years. Ethan clenched his fist. Ryan didn't forget Max. He just didn't know Max was still waiting. He took a deep breath, then messaged back to Ryan's old friend. Help me contact Ryan. He needs to know an important truth. Ethan didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. Waiting another 4 years was not an option. That afternoon, the sunlight faded on the horizon, turning the endless sea surface golden. Ethan sat in a corner of the cafe across from the hotel, his eyes fixed on his phone screen. On it, a message from a stranger was still displayed before his eyes, making his heart beat faster as he read each word. Ryan is alive, but he has changed a lot. I'll send you his phone number. Ethan took a deep breath, his finger slightly trembling as he dialed the phone number he had just received. He didn't know what would happen, but he had a strong feeling that this call would change everything. The phone rang for a long time. He wondered if Ryan would answer, if he still remembered Max, or perhaps he had forgotten everything that once belonged to him. A deep voice came through. Hello? Ethan was silent for a moment, trying to calm himself before speaking. Hi, Ryan. This is Ethan Carter. I know you don't know me, but I need to tell you something very important. On the other end of the line, there was a silence. I don't have time for strange calls, Ryan replied, his voice somewhat cautious. This is about Max. The silence lasted longer than before. Which Max? Ryan's voice lowered, almost a whisper. Max, your dog. The dog you once raised, once considered a companion. The dog you lost in the accident 4 years ago. The breathing on the other end of the phone became more rapid. Impossible, Ryan said quietly, as if he was talking to himself. I know this is hard to believe, but Max is still alive, and he's still waiting for you. For 4 years, he has never left the hotel, never given up. Every day he sits there, looking toward the road where he last saw you. Ryan didn't respond, but Ethan could feel the shock from the other end of the line. Impossible, Ryan repeated, but this time, his voice was no longer as certain as before. I have proof, Ethan continued. I filmed a video of him, and I think you need to see this. He sent the video link. He wasn't sure if Ryan would open it right away, but Ethan had a feeling he would watch it. A few minutes passed. His phone vibrated. Ryan Parker has viewed your video. Ethan held his phone tightly, waiting for a reaction. 1 minute, then 2 minutes, then 3 minutes passed in silence. Then messages appeared. How can this be real? He's really still there? I don't know what I should do. Ethan realized there was something in these messages: confusion, fear, and a pain that had been buried for a long time. His phone suddenly rang. Ryan was calling back. Ethan quickly answered. Ryan! Ryan's voice trembled. I watched the video. I saw him. But how can it be? I thought he was long gone. No, he was never gone, Ethan replied, his voice certain. He's still there, waiting for you. Never moved even a step. This time Ryan said nothing, but Ethan could hear heavy breathing, a restrained inhale, and then a soft, choking sound. Ryan could no longer hold back his emotions. He had thought Max was gone, had thought everything had ended long ago. But now the truth hit him straight in the heart, a truth too big to accept immediately. What should I do? Ryan's voice faltered. You have to go back, Ethan said without hesitation. Max has waited for you for 4 years. Don't make him wait any longer. A long silence followed. I can't. Ethan frowned. Why? Ryan took a deep breath, but his voice was full of fear. I'm not me anymore. Ethan blinked, not understanding. What do you mean? After the accident, I went through many surgeries. I'm not the person Max once knew anymore. I don't know if he'll still recognize me, if I can face him. I don't know if I have the courage to go back. Ethan gripped his phone tightly. He could understand. Ryan wasn't just afraid Max wouldn't recognize him, but also afraid to face his own past. Ryan, Ethan said slowly, you may not be the Ryan you once knew, but you're still Max's Ryan. He's not waiting for a face. He's not waiting for a shape. He's waiting for your heart. And that heart has never left that place. Ryan didn't respond immediately. Ethan heard a heavy breath, then an emotional sigh. I need time to think. Ethan nodded, though he knew Ryan couldn't see it. I understand, but remember one thing. Max can't wait forever. The call ended. Ethan put his phone down on the table, his mind filled with heavy thoughts. Would Ryan dare to come back and face Max? Could a person who had changed so much accept the unconditional love from a creature that had always been waiting for him? Only time would tell. But Ethan hoped that, before it was too late, Ryan would make the right choice. Ryan sat in the old armchair in his small apartment, his eyes lost in an undefined space. His hand gripped the phone tightly, but he hadn't dared to reopen the video Ethan had sent. On the screen, Max was still there, waiting for him. 4 years, a period long enough to change a person. Ryan gently touched his face. Faint scars ran along his cheekbones down to his jaw. After the accident, his face had been severely damaged, forcing him to undergo many reconstructive surgeries. His features were no longer as they were. He didn't recognize himself when he looked in the mirror. And if he couldn't recognize himself, how could Max recognize him? He closed his eyes, a flood of memories rushing back. Max, when he was small, would always run around his feet, eagerly wagging his tail whenever he came home. He was the only dog that could make him smile even on his worst days. They had grown up together, experiencing countless moments side by side. But now everything had changed. He was no longer the Ryan of the past. Ryan took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he opened his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, stopping at Ethan's name. He didn't know if he had enough courage to go back. But before he could think further, his phone suddenly rang. Ethan was calling. Ryan stared at the screen, feeling as if someone was pulling him back to reality. He hesitated for a few seconds before pressing the answer button. "Ryan, have you decided yet?" Ryan was silent for a long time. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "I'm afraid Max won't recognize me." On the other end, Ethan didn't rush to reply. He seemed to understand the fear in Ryan's heart. "Ryan," Ethan said slowly, "you can't let fear hold you back forever. I know you think you've changed, but Max doesn't just remember your face. He remembers your heart. He remembers your scent, your voice, the way you used to pet him whenever he was anxious. He remembers everything about you, not just your outer appearance." Ryan clenched his fist. Ethan continued, his voice full of certainty. "For 4 years, Max has never given up. He chose to believe you would come back. Can you do the same?" Ryan took a deep breath. Outside the window, the night city was quieter than ever. He had been running away for too long. He had convinced himself that Max was gone, that there was nothing to go back to. But that wasn't true. Max was still there, waiting for him. If he didn't go back now, perhaps he would lose this chance forever. Ryan closed his eyes, then slowly exhaled. "You're right." Ethan remained silent, waiting. Ryan opened his computer, searching for the earliest flight to the coastal town where the hotel was located. There was only one flight early tomorrow morning. "I will go back," Ryan said, this time more certain. "I will see Max again." Ethan smiled. "Max will wait for you. He always has." Ryan hung up, his heart still pounding in his chest. He didn't know what would happen when he got there. Would Max really recognize him? But there was one thing he knew for sure. He had to try. He owed Max that much. The next morning, Ryan's flight took off, carrying him back to the place where he had lost a part of himself. And in that place, a faithful friend was still waiting for him, even though 4 years had passed. The afternoon sky was tinged with a pale orange. The sea was calm, and the wind blew gently through the palm trees along the road. The seaside hotel appeared in view, still as peaceful as ever. But for Ryan, this place contained a past he had tried to forget for 4 years. The taxi slowed down, its wheels grinding softly on the stone pavement in front of the hotel lobby. Ryan held his breath, his hands unconsciously tightening together as his eyes fell upon the familiar silhouette. Maximum. He was still there, still sitting right in front of the hotel lobby, still gazing at the old road as if expecting something. Ryan could hardly breathe. He had seen this image through the video, but now, standing in front of Max in flesh and blood, he truly felt the pain this dog had endured. 4 years. For 4 years, he had never left. The driver turned to look at Ryan, gently reminding him, "We've arrived." Ryan nodded slightly. He opened the car door and stepped out, but as soon as his feet touched the ground, he felt his heart beating so fast it might burst. He took a deep breath, slowly approaching Max. The dog turned his head, his cold eyes sweeping over Ryan for a moment. Then, no reaction at all. Ryan froze. Max didn't run to him, didn't wag his tail, didn't bark with joy as Ryan had imagined. He didn't recognize him. A sea breeze passed by, but Ryan felt as if a rock was pressing on his chest. He knew this could happen. He had prepared himself for it. But when faced with the moment, he couldn't suppress the pain rising in his heart. Ryan knelt down, his eyes filled with tears. Max ... His voice caught in his throat, as if breaking into tiny pieces. Max sat still, his head tilted slightly to one side. Ryan felt his chest tighten. He was no longer the same person he was 4 years ago. He knew that. His face had changed. His voice was different too. The scars on his face, the features no longer familiar. How could Max recognize him? Ryan smiled sadly, slowly extending his hand toward the dog. Max, it's me. But Max didn't move. There was no sign that he recognized Ryan. His eyes swept over Ryan once more, then turned back to the road ahead, as if the master he was waiting for still hadn't arrived. Ryan was motionless. Had Max forgotten him? Or had he never thought Ryan would change like this? The wave of emotions in Ryan's heart burst. He had imagined this day many times, had thought that just upon meeting, Max would rush to him, wag his tail, bark with joy like in the old days. But reality was crueler than anything he could have imagined. His voice caught again, his eyes stinging. Max, I'm back. But Max still didn't move. He just looked at Ryan with skeptical eyes, as if he were just a stranger. Ryan felt his heart being squeezed. Had he come too late? Had he changed too much? Max had waited for him for 4 years, but when he returned, the dog no longer recognized him. Was he truly still Ryan Parker to Max? Ryan knelt down, his hand clenched into a fist on the cold ground. He looked at Max, his heart filled with pain. Max, it's me. His voice caught, as if each word uttered was as heavy as lead. Max didn't respond. He just stood still, his eyes still full of doubt. He felt something very familiar, but at the same time, very strange. 4 years. 4 years of hope followed by disappointment. 4 years of waiting in solitude, only to face a face that no longer resembled the one in his memory. Ryan felt his heart tighten. He began to perform familiar actions that Max used to love. He snapped his fingers twice, the sound echoing in the still air. Max didn't react. He rummaged through his backpack, taking out an old tennis ball, an item that Max once loved so much he would chase it for hours without tiring. Max stared at the ball, his ears twitching slightly, but still he didn't move. Ryan was desperate. Had he come too late? Had Max truly forgotten him? These thoughts strangled Ryan's heart, but before he could say anything, a sudden loud noise erupted. A motorcycle revved its engine loudly right in front of the hotel. The loud sound echoed through the quiet space, making Max jump. He backed up a step, his eyes filled with fear. Survival instinct kicked in. Max turned and ran. In an instant, he rushed straight onto the road, thinking of nothing but the fear controlling his mind. The days of wandering filled with insecurity, the years of waiting without response, all came crashing down at once. Ryan was horrified. Max, no exclamation mark. He didn't have time to think, he just ran after him. Max ran across the parking lot, then headed straight for the busy road in front of the hotel. Vehicles sped by, headlights shining directly at him. Ryan didn't hesitate. He chased after Max with all his strength. But the road was slippery from sea mist, and he slipped and fell hard to the ground. Pain shot through him, but Ryan didn't care. He looked up and saw Max had almost reached the middle of the road. Max seemed to hear nothing anymore. He just ran. Ryan tried to get up, but his legs were shaking, his body aching from the fall. In an instinctive reflex, he raised his hand toward Max, just as he used to do when training him to stop. Ryan's voice was shaky but determined. Max, don't run anymore. I won't leave again. Max halted. His paws slipped a little on the road, his breathing rapid. He looked at Ryan. He was extending his hand to him, just like in the old days, just like when he called him back after playing on the beach. A truck was approaching, its headlights shining directly into Max's eyes. In that moment, memory surged forth. Max looked at Ryan fallen on the ground, at his outstretched hand. Images overlapped with the days when he was small, when Ryan trained him in the yard, the times he extended his hand, comforting him, telling him he didn't need to be afraid. He remembered that fateful night 4 years ago. Ryan had also reached out to him, but then was taken away forever. Would he lose him again this time? Max trembled, but then he turned and ran back toward Ryan. Max didn't let fear pull him away anymore. He rushed straight toward Ryan, his legs as strong as if there had never been a moment of weakness. Before Ryan could react, Max had buried his head in his chest, his breathing rapid, but no longer fearful. Ryan felt Max's strong heartbeat, felt the soft fur that he had once known in every detail. Tears welled up as he wrapped his arms around Max, his voice breaking. "I'm here. I won't go anywhere again." Max didn't care about Ryan's changed face. He didn't care about the scars, about the deeper voice, about anything else. He only knew that this feeling was real. The person he had waited for 4 years was here. Ryan had truly returned. Max whimpered softly, then barked loudly for the first time after 4 long years of silence. No more doubt, no more fear. Max had truly recognized Ryan. He understood that this time, Ryan would not leave again. Although Ryan and Max had found each other again, their journey wasn't truly over. The wounds weren't just on the surface, but were deeply etched in both their hearts. Max still had moments of alertness. Whenever Ryan left the hotel room, even for a moment, he would raise his head to watch, his ears twitching with worry. Even though Max had recognized Ryan, he still couldn't fully believe that Ryan wouldn't leave again. Ryan understood this too. He couldn't expect Max to immediately forget the lonely years. He had to prove to Max that this time, he was truly staying. In the first days after their reunion, Max was still not used to having Ryan constantly by his side. Every morning, Ryan would wake up and find Max lying beside the hotel room door, eyes wide open as if he feared Ryan would disappear when he fell asleep. When Ryan took him to the beach for walks, he wouldn't run freely as before, but always stayed close to him, as if afraid that if Ryan went out of sight, he would vanish forever. Once, when Ryan stepped out onto the balcony to make a call, Max immediately jumped up, ran to him and whined anxiously. Ryan knelt down, placed his hand on Max's back, his voice warm but certain. "It's okay. I'm here." Max looked up at him, his eyes seeming to ask, "Really?" Ryan gently embraced him. "Really? I won't leave again." Ryan decided to start over, just like the first day he trained Max when he was still a puppy. He spent all day beside Max, patiently helping him feel safer. They walked around the hotel every morning, visiting Mrs. Martha's cafe, the woman who had cared for Max for 4 years. When she saw Max resting his head on Ryan's lap instead of staring at the road, Mrs. Martha said emotionally, "He's never been like this with anyone else in 4 years." Ryan smiled softly, stroking Max's soft fur. "We still have a long journey ahead, but at least we're on that road together." In the days that followed, Ryan tried leaving Max alone in the room for a while to check if he would panic. At first, when he just stepped outside, Max would bark, run to the door and scratch hard. But gradually, day by day, he learned to trust that Ryan would return. The first time Ryan left for 10 minutes and came back, Max was still lying on the bed, but his eyes followed Ryan's every step. The next time, Ryan walked around the hotel grounds for half an hour, then returned. Max no longer ran to the door, but he still stood up, his tail wagging slightly, his eyes full of expectation. And after many weeks, one afternoon when Ryan returned to the room after buying food, Max just lifted his head to look at him, then laid his head back down to continue sleeping. No more tension, no more panic. Ryan smiled, gently sitting down beside him. Max had trusted again. That night, Max no longer slept by the door. He climbed onto the bed, curling up beside Ryan, just as he used to do 4 years ago. Ryan was speechless. He reached out to gently stroke Max's fur, feeling his warmth. For the first time in 4 years, Max truly believed Ryan wouldn't leave again. Ryan closed his eyes, softly whispering, "Welcome home, buddy." Beside him, Max sighed with relief, nestling his head against Ryan's chest. They had lost 4 years to find each other again, but now they would never lose each other again. The sunset stretched across the beach, painting the sky and water surface with brilliant orange. Waves lapped gently against the shore, bringing cool breezes, creating a strangely peaceful scene. Ryan stood in front of the hotel room door, his hand resting lightly on the already open door. His heart beat gently in his chest, but this time there was no fear, no hesitation. He just stood there and waited. On the other side of the room, Max lay on the carpet near the bed. He had observed Ryan leaving and returning many times over the past weeks. But today something was different. Ryan didn't call him, didn't extend his hand, didn't urge him. He just opened the door and waited. Max raised his head, his deep brown eyes looking at Ryan for a long time. He wasn't in a hurry, no longer afraid. He had waited for Ryan to return for 4 years. But today he didn't need to wait anymore. Max slowly stood up, his legs steady. He shook himself gently, then took a step forward, then another step, and then he ran. Max rushed toward Ryan without hesitation, without fear. Ryan knelt down, arms wide open. In the moment Max touched him, he held him tight. The soft fur, the warm breath, Max's strong heartbeat pressed against his chest. Everything was real. "Let's go home, buddy," Ryan whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. Max barked softly as if answering him. For the first time, there was no doubt left. Max understood. This time, Ryan truly would not leave again. The next day, Ryan packed his luggage, ready to leave this hotel for the first time in 4 years. Not to abandon, but to take Max with him. Mrs. Martha stood on the steps, her eyes sparkling with joy. She had witnessed Max waiting in vain for 4 years, and now she also witnessed the moment he was taken home. She bent down to pat Max's head, her voice gentle. "You've waited long enough, little one. Now go home." Ryan gently tightened his grip on the leash, but Max didn't resist, didn't back away as before. He walked beside Ryan, steady as if he had never been afraid. Ryan opened the car door. Max looked at him for a moment, then jumped onto the back seat without hesitation. This time, he knew exactly where he was going. Ryan looked at Max, then at the road ahead. Over the past 4 years, he had lost many things, but now he had a chance to start over. He got into the car, closed the door, and took a deep breath. His hand rested on the steering wheel, but when he turned his head to the side, he saw that Max was no longer looking out at the road as before. He was only looking at him. Ryan chuckled softly, reaching out to gently pat Max's head. "Let's go, Max. Let's go home." The car rolled forward, leaving behind years of lonely waiting, days of fear and loss. Now only the future remained, and this time, they would never lose each other again. 4 years of waiting, 4 years of loneliness. But Max had never given up. No matter how the world changed, no matter who passed by advising him to leave, Max chose to believe. And finally, his loyalty was rewarded. The story of Max and Ryan isn't just about an emotional reunion, but also a testament to unconditional love, unwavering loyalty, and the power of faith. Do you believe animals can love and wait just like humans? If one day you encounter a stray dog gazing somewhere, perhaps it's also waiting for someone to return. Share this story if you believe in the miracle of loyalty. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss emotional stories like this. Thank you for watching. See you in the next stories.